Before setting out to learn that thing you've been tasked with, do you know how to study and learn? Do you know the difference between studying and learning, and encoding in fact? I remember at one point during my time at medical school, I would put in hours and hours and hours of studying. Yet one of my mates who studied a fraction of the time that I put in, he matched me, and very easily. To this day, I remember his response when I asked him, "How are you doing it?" Study smart, not just hard. Okay, fine. I took a step back to see how are people studying, and there was in fact a pattern with those who did effortlessly well. We all want to do well. If you don't, you're lying. There's a method, a technique, and a science behind learning. Now most of us, including me, we were never taught how to learn and how to study, and what's good and what's bad and what is a bit useless. This is the first video of a series where I'll be taking you through learning and studying. My goal is to teach you the art of learning and studying. Hey friends, my name is Choudhury. I'm a medical doctor, the co-host of Scrubbed In, and the co-founder of Peerr, where you can learn from your favorite educators. Now before we get into the really deep topics of learning and studying, I want to start at the definition stage so that we're all on the same page. Today we're talking studying versus learning versus what is exactly encoding. Now studying, I get asked quite a lot, how do I study? What's the best way to study? A lot of us assume studying is the same as learning. When we accept they aren't the same thing, we can start to understand what my friend meant when he said, study smart, not just hard. Studying is the physical processes that we take to learn. So studying is reading, it's writing, it's reciting, it's watching. It can be even shouting out a certain topic or paragraph. It's doing flashcards, doing quizzes, all of the processes that you undertake to learn content. Now studying can be, for example, going for a jog whilst listening to a YouTube video on heart failure. I'm sure you'd learn something. I don't know how well, but you would learn something. Okay, let's talk a little bit about learning now. Now that's the cognitive processes that take place within our brains to encode what it is that we're studying to then store it into our memory. In simple terms, learning is being able to take whatever it is that you're studying, to digest it, to understand it, and then to file it away in our brain so that we can also easily reach and retrieve that file when we need it. Say for example, when you're sitting an exam or being questioned by a consultant, or when a patient presents to you. Say you now half-heartedly study and use poor techniques. What that means is that you're going to be filing that content away in your memory very poorly, and you're more likely to actually forget and be unable to recall it or retrieve it when you need it. But if you study with highly efficient techniques, active recall, spaced repetition, and doing quizzes, you encode it better. That means you file it away in a better manner that you can allow yourself to remember it and recall it when it matters, for exams, for treating patients, or for doing a particular job. So the next question you should be asking is, how do we encode better? To understand encoding, we need to understand the orders of learning. Basically, what's bad, what's mediocre, what's good, and what's excellent when it comes to the methods of learning. Now that requires its own video, and I'll be doing all of that in this series going forward. But just to keep it simple here, encoding can be simple as just storing it in our memory as facts that you have no clue what it actually means or how to apply it. Say memorizing that in atrial fibrillation there are no P waves on an ECG. Now you could just remember that as a fact and not understand why. Or you could encode it better by truly understanding atrial fibrillation and understanding that the electrical activity in the atria is very disorganized. So when you go to do an ECG, you don't get a neat P wave. So now when we talk about the extremes of higher learning, you should be able to create, teach, and pass on that knowledge. So how you study is directly related to how you encode information into your brain. Take a moment to just process that. How you study is directly related to how you encode information into your brain. Now, each of the following will require its own video, but to give you an idea on how to encode better, first let's go back to the studies done by Professor Dunlosky and others. They're all very well known now, and a lot of YouTubers have actually spoken about it, so just type it in on YouTube. But he's got this really great paper that I love, linked in the description below, where he assesses 10 different learning techniques, essentially methods of studying to encode. There's a range of studying methods that are low utility and high utility. Highlighting and rereading were low utility, essentially saying its efficiency to encode is lower, say compared to utilizing quizzes to actively recall. Now, I've noticed a lot of people assume that means highlighting and rereading is useless. No, it's low utility compared to the others. It does work, you can pass exams with it, but you probably would have to put in significantly more hours, and that would just probably pass the exams or match your peers. So what we do when we study to learn is important. So let's look to wrap up now. Essentially, if you were to study, say, 10 hours to learn, say, about heart failure, but I surrounded you with distractors and you simply read a big, poorly worded textbook, this will interfere with your learning ability. And by the end of the 10 hours, yeah, you might learn a thing or two about heart failure, but you'd probably forget and perform poorly when that knowledge matters, say in an exam or when treating a patient. But if I now took an individual, sat him or her down without distractors and used highly efficient study techniques, his or her learning processes are more efficient. And so he or her might learn everything there is to learn about heart failure in 2 hours. And they might also remember it for longer and be able to use it when it matters. What you want to do is study efficiently to learn content better and faster. So when you see that you're putting in 1,000 hours more than someone else, and that other person does better or the same whilst studying significantly less, you need to look at how you're studying and the efficiency of it all, and how well you're encoding it into your brain. The number of hours studying does not mean that you're learning things well at all, and it especially doesn't guarantee success. And heads up, whilst a student you might have a lot of potential hours to use for studying, but once you've graduated, once you're working and you've got a family and a social life to all maintain, you have to have really nailed the efficiency of your studying. And that's it for today. I'd love it if you could give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video where I'll be talking about the foundations of learning.